when you're taking off to go to another program, buy another book, start researching more, even go into your head and start trying to problem solve all this, your partner is going to code all of that as abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife, your partner, she's going to read this as he's leaving me now. He's not with me anymore. You might be going off in the search of the one solution. You're going to solve this problem for her, for us. But what she's really asking is, are you there for me? Do you care how I feel? Or can you be with me in this right now? And strangely enough, there's a lot of reassurance when you stay in your heart and you stay present with her, and you know how to keep that bridge open between the two of you. And more concretely, that can just be asking better questions when she shares that. That can be just expressing the devastation and the impact that you recognize this is having on you, on her. That doesn't require you to go anywhere or do anything, any grand gestures or big commitments or double down on something. It's about sitting in that pain, sitting in that uncertainty, sitting in the fear with her, not leaving her alone in it.
Hello, everyone. I am here with Geoff Steurer. Geoff, most of the people know you from the podcast that you and your wife do. I want to thank you, first of all, for all the energy and love that you pour into this space. I mean, there's literally millions of people being affected by this, and your guys' podcast is just so awesome. You could get your perspective and then your wife's perspective. It's a really cool thing. So I want to thank you for doing that, which leads me into what we're going to be talking about today, which is the dreaded question that I bet most of the men listening to this have gotten, which is, honey, are you even in good recovery? Right. And I think in the beginning, this is a little frustrating because guys are doing their best to be in good recovery. But I think it becomes extra frustrating when this is asked a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. Are you even in good recovery? Are you doing everything to recover? So I first want to ask you, why does this question come up? I mean, what's going on in the partner's head when they're asking this? Now, and I want to preface this with a lot of the guys who are being asked this have bought the books. They're seeing their CSAT regularly. They're going to some sort of peer support avenue. So like the things are there that they need to be doing. And then they're still getting this question. What's going on in their partner's head?
I think they're guarding themselves against future trauma. Really what this comes down to is a betrayed partner is not living in post-traumatic stress disorder. This is post, present, and future potential for re-traumatization. So naturally the way the brain works with trauma is it's scanning the horizon for ongoing threats. And a lot of the times the things that were, the damage that was done secretively, there was a lot of manipulation. There was a lot of, just control. And so they're trying to get in front of this. Every part of them doesn't believe that they'll necessarily somehow spot it automatically. So they're going to be looking and sensing. And I honestly think so much of it is just about preserving not only themselves, but also the relationship. You matter to them. They don't want to lose you. And they're often not going to lead with that and say kind of that softer underbelly of, you're so important to me, I don't want to lose you. They're more going to talk about it from, I don't want to get hurt again. But part of what's going to hurt them is losing the connection to you. And so if you can see it, that question as an invitation to really reassure your partner that you care about the impact this has on them and cares about the impact that this has on the relationship, it turns into a very different conversation.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people listening are going to be like, hey, every time she says that, I find another therapy, avenue. I buy another book. I pop on some podcasts when I'm at the gym, right? I mean, that's, and then it still doesn't work. So
right.
Speak to that piece. I mean, if it's really a safety issue that they're speaking about, are you in good recovery? The guys, as Mr. Fix-It, typically, the answer is, okay, well, what else can I buy? What else can I sign up for? Geoff, what would you say? Because I for personal experience, I was asked this question in my own recovery by my wife, and it didn't really matter what I added to the schedule. The reaction was still the same. A couple months later, the same question would be asked. So what do the partners really want? And rather than the guys swiping the credit card and buying more intensives or books or whatever, what's another avenue they can do that would better speak to what the partner is actually trying to get at?
Well, this one's free, which is basically, and it's going to sound super counterintuitive. Well, and let me preface it, maybe build some context around this. When you're taking off to go to another program, buy another book, start researching more, even go into your head and start trying to problem solve all this, your partner is going to code all of that as abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to speak kind of in a general way. Like your wife, your partner, she's going to read this as he's leaving me now. He's not with me anymore. And you might be going off in the search of the one solution or of this, you're going to solve this problem for her, for us. But what she's really asking is, are you there for me? Do you care how I feel? Or can you be with me in this right now? And strangely enough, there's a lot of reassurance when you stay in your heart and you stay present with her and you know how to keep that bridge open between the two of you. And more concretely, that can just be asking better questions when she shares that. That can be really just expressing the devastation and the impact that you recognize this is having on you, on her. And that doesn't require you to go anywhere or do anything, any grand gestures or big commitments or double down on something. It's about sitting in that pain, sitting in that uncertainty, sitting in the fear with her, not leaving her alone in it. And this is something that most of us, especially as men, like most of us have never had this modeled. Most of us have no idea how to do this. Most of us just freeze in this moment. And then to get unfrozen, we just start doing stuff.
I'd say, and this could be a high achieving, successful male reaction, but a lot of defensive-ness. I mean, when that question's proposed, at least from what I've heard a lot of my groups, the reaction is, how dare you? I'm doing everything that I can do. And what you're saying, which I really like and I agree with, the question isn't, are you in good recovery? Aren't you in recovery? The question is, I'm still freaked out. The state of in the state that I'm at. Right. And so to that point, does jumping on the airplane and flying to another intensive make her less freaked out? I think it depends on the partner. But again, if she's freaked out and asking that question, is it really about recovery? So what do you suggest then? I mean, if the guy's going to get into some action around this, the classic answer that every guy does not want to hear is empathy. Right. That's the classic CSAT rebuttal. So if you can't tell the guy to be empathetic, what other kind of action would you tell him to get into? Because I think it's a bit frustrating when the only response from the therapist is, hey, be more empathetic, or hey, be present in her pain. Because again, it's like, I don't really know what you mean when you say those two things. It's
tough because yes, those are the things that do help. But a lot of the times those can feel so vague that people don't even know concretely what that even means. It's like, what is empathy? What does sitting in the pain even look like measurably if I were watching somebody do it? And in a really concrete way, this is really just about, in a lot of ways, about what you're not going to do. And what you're not going to do is you're not going to launch it into an explanation or pull out the performance review, how well you've done. You're not going to turn your face away. You're going to move closer. You're going to stay engaged. You might ask questions that elicit more of a conversation instead of trying to just deliver some sort of either rebuttal or proof or evidence. So for example, you could even just start to talk in ways that signal to your partner, of course, like almost agreeing with them. Of course, you'd be worried about this. Of course, you're going to be nervous about this. Even doing a self-evaluation in that moment of trying to find the truth in what they're saying, because it's likely there are areas that you could do more, you could, and even if you feel like you've covered every single thing, is there any little block foundation of truth that she's building this on that you can look at and acknowledge? Just looking for something to agree with there can start to decrease the intensity of there, because it's either she's just making stuff up out of the blue and she's crazy, or she's detecting something and sensing something. And let's be honest, any guy that's numbed himself out or spent years hiding in line and in covert behaviors, the sensitivity is not going to be super high. It's something you have to grow into and learn. And so your partner is going to be more sensitive, not only from the trauma, but also just because their feelers haven't been numbed out. And going with their take on this initially is a great strategy. It's so important just to go with it, find something to agree with, stay with them in the pain. And this isn't just going with it like, okay, I'll just do whatever you say. This is about saying, you might be onto something here. Let's look at that.
I think important thing that me and you need to transition into is kind of the topic of good recovery, because to be completely honest, Geoff, you and I both being in this space, there's guys that are not in good recovery. That accusation, what Geoff and I are saying is, what I'm not saying is you're in good recovery and here's how to evade her question. Her question could be legitimate. You know, I'll share a brief story of mine. I was 2-3 months into recovery after discovery. And my wife came up and she said, I was literally filling out the Help Her Heal book. We were doing an in-home separation at the time. And she came in and she said, "Hey, I don't think you're trying as hard as you can." And man, I inhaled, Geoff, to terror a new one, because I was like, man, what are you talking about? I'm spending 15 hours a week on this stuff. And then I stopped because I don't think I would have stopped if I wasn't working on the Help Her Heal book, but I think that book prompted me to stop.
Yeah.
And I thought, and you know what crossed my mind, and I think for all the successful men listening to this, you know what? She was right. She has seen me time and time again bust my ass in business, in different businesses that I've started, different startups. You know, she's seen me go ferociously after something that I want. And I was thinking in that moment, if she's the most important thing to me in my entire life, which she is, why am I not ferociously attacking recovery? And we'll get into some of that.
Sure, that's fair.
You and I are discussing. That was kind of the epiphany for me. Was I agreed with her. And to your point from your last kind of piece of advice that you said there, I like that, because it's like, there's a lot of different ways to agree. I think the one that I would add is, reminder that how big this is. And you can say, hey, you know what? That question you're asking is legitimate. This thing has to do with my upbringing, a distrust of others. This has to do with isolation, an intimacy disorder, a love avoidance. I mean, there's so many aspects to this that would create an environment where I would do these behaviors. And so it's a legitimate question to say, hey, are you in good recovery? Because, there's a list of 38 things that commonly lead to this. Am I addressing all of those? And do I have a plan? And so it's a legit question. So I think agreeing when they're acknowledging how big it is. But one thing that I've learned in recovery, post 2 years, there's still a lot of reassurance that they want. I was thinking that after 2 years that would go away. It did not go away. If anything, it increased because in the beginning it was a big topic of discussion. And she was hurt, a lot of tears, a lot of therapy appointments, and then 2 years later, a lot of that fear is still there for her. And so even though we're getting along, maybe you're being sexually intimate together again, there's still a lot of that fear. And so she wants that reassurance of, hey, I get it. This is huge. But what I can tell you is I'm doing this, and I'm aware of these 3 things. I haven't got to these other 5 yet because these other 2 are so big and so important. But those other 5 are written down. My therapist is aware of them, right? So just kind of reassuring that, listen, I know it's huge. And here's what I'm doing to stay in good sobriety while I'm working on, long-term permanent recovery. But I guess that kind of transition us into a place that this conversation needs to go, Geoff, which is, what is good recovery? I'm curious, if you had to choose one thing, I know that's hard, if you had to choose one thing that really you see in the men who are in great recovery and the men who, take a little bit longer to get there, what's the one thing? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
No, it's fine. I think for me, it would be ownership. It'd be transitioning the responsibility to yourself instead of to your partner. I mean, hands down, once the ownership is locked in and it's yours to own, then you're going to start looking for the blind spots. You're going to start looking for resources. You're going to start and the ownership also includes the validation. So even in our example here, where your partner is saying, I don't know if you're in good recovery, where you can say, I'm going to look at that. That's a really legitimate point. Who am I to pretend I don't have blind spots? Who am I to act like I've solved all these 38 areas that could be contributing to these issues? So the ownership basically takes it away from the mental load your partner has to carry and puts it squarely on your shoulders. And that includes seeking out resources and doing all the book work, et cetera, but also the ownership of how did we get here? Because there aren't 2 sides of the story when it comes to that type of accountability. When there's been betrayal and secrets and hiding and those kinds of things, there's one side to that story, which was I made these choices. I went this direction. I've been doing these things. You didn't create any of that. I'm owning this.
Mm-hmm.
I'll certainly share my journey and open up and connect. And maybe there's things that you want to do in your own journey and healing and you want to share with me and talk about it. But when it comes to this particular issue, it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
That changes everything. And that's, to me, when recovery starts, whether it's you've stopped the behavior and now you're working on longer term recovery type items, but none of it really starts until that ownership's in place.
Mm-hmm. And I want to empathize with the guys too, because as one of them myself, in the beginning, it's difficult to take ownership over this as much as you want to.
Totally.
You don't want to be a sex addict. I know I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, going to 12-step was like the hardest thing ever. Just walking in with my little book. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, how many times do I have to, like, six times, 8 times, you know, like how many times do I have to go to this? I did not want to be a sex addict. I didn't want to be a love addict. I didn't want to be a porn addict. Right. So that was not something, an identity that I wanted to take on. I did not want to admit to that. I think a lot of successful men, a lot of people look at successful men and they think, wow, these guys have it all figured to get out. I would say at least in my groups, and in my mastermind groups. So not, you know, outside of the sex addiction field, but also just in the business field. I would say these guys are more jacked up than the popular. I think that's what drives a lot of their success is I have to do something to make up for my my perceived inadequacies, right?
Sure.
So my point is, you know, I think I do agree with you. I think ownership is, I think that is number one. I think it's number one, whether you're married or whether you're single. I think just really taking ownership over this problem and how it got here. But I also want to empathize with the guys. You know, this is a hard thing to take on. Society definitely labels sexual things as some sort of pervert. You know, I think most people's assumption when they find out that you are a sex addict or you go to SA or SAA is that you're a child molester or something. You know, you're taking pictures of women who can't see you in the bushes. You know,
Right.
And again, and that's tough to take that on. And I think we know that society's approaches that. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think, especially as a successful guy who's really image management's a big portion of your life is controlling what people think and see in you, you know, to take on a problem of this caliber and genre can be tough. I know it was for me. I mean, it really took me about 6 months to own this to the point where I wasn't trying to protect myself from it. So I just wanted to speak to
I think
that.
I think that's important. I think it's important to be able to have compassion for how hard this is, because there is a lot of internal splitting that goes on. In fact, that's what drives the ability to have a double life, is that there's a view of yourself that you keep and you want others to respond to. And then there's this other part of yourself, the shadow part, that you don't want to look at and you don't want anybody else to look at. So to integrate those and have them start talking to each other is a very compassionate, gentle act of just saying, I did this, but I'm not going to die. I hurt this person, but I can still do something. I'm a source of pain and I also can be a source of comfort. So integrating these two, what would seem like opposing worlds, is possible, but you're right. It does take time, but it's led by that longing to get well, to not have this be something that's a part of your life anymore. And really, again, so many partners, for 25 years, I've worked with these issues. I'm telling you, most of the customers that contact me that want help are the betrayed partners. They're the ones that are bleeding out, hurting. And so much of the work is about shifting that energy and I maybe anxiety or just energy back to the person who could actually do something about it, which is the person who broke the trust. And that shift is everything.
Yeah, well said. You know, for me, the thing that shifted the thing that shifted me taking ownership was peer support and connection with other men in this. And it's funny because I was also really resistant to that, because right when I got in, that was what everybody told me. You know, every therapist said it's going to be more effective than therapy. I mean, it is hands down the most important thing that you need. You need to find a tribe of men you enjoy recovering with. Now, they don't tell you how long this is going to be, but that's one thing that I do say on my podcast. Guys, I know you don't want this to be long. I didn't want it to be long either. For someone like, you know, I'm not going to speak for all of you. For me, this is lifelong. To me, I consider this an uphill battle. There are so many cultural factors pushing me in the wrong direction, that if I'm not sprinting as hard as I can in the right direction, life in the sexual culture that we live in, life will take me into compulsivity again. It just will. I know that this life, we live in a very sexual place that does not value a lot of the values that you're trying to hold up
Right.
in your what. And I know that can be frustrating for a lot of guys, because I think that adds to the normalization of this is, oh, it's really just my wife that has an issue with this. As I look around, this is a commonly practiced thing by all guys, right? So it's like this, again, further assisting into that double life of, all right, I got one for my wife, and then I got the one that us guys live, right? I think that's challenging. But what I was getting at was, I think what peer support does is it makes you feel like you're not weird, like there are other people, normal people, who are not perverts, felons and whatever else. They're normal human beings who have families and careers, who are trying to, who are struggling with these exact same problems. And so when you're in these groups, it's, you stop labeling yourself and judging yourself a certain way. And hearing some of the stories, I mean, my gosh, it's like, they're all different in their own way, and they hurt so much to hear. And I think being in that environment, it allows you to get out of your world a little bit and realize, hey, this isn't a you thing. This is a learned problem that all of the men in these room learned, and they can unlearn it. And I think it's hard to take peer support seriously, I think, Geoff, because it sounds too good to be true. It's like, why would sitting in a room with a bunch of other addicts help me? And that was my resistance for a long time. I still went to the groups, but I was not connecting with these guys.
Right.
And it wasn't until I really let them in and let myself into their life, when I finally, the shame would reduce. And then that allowed me to own it, because I didn't want to own something that made me a bad person. I think that was just kind of the barrier. And so, and I'm going to be completely vulnerable with you guys. I wasn't acting out in that first year, but I don't think from a recovery standpoint, I don't know if I moved an inch. I mean, I was just so not wanting this in my life that I wasn't even able to recover, because all I wanted to do was to put this behind me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the power of the group is that the shame that gets built in the secrecy and the hiding and the crossing your own lines and the lack of integrity and all the things all the self-betrayal that's happening, which dumps on so much shame and embarrassment and humiliation privately. You just can't imagine, because you can hardly stand to look at it yourself. Mm-hmm. So the idea that other people could look at it and still embrace you and still see you as a good person, mm-hmm. worthy of connection and belonging, is just hard to even imagine. And so it's a corrective experience. You have to actually walk into it and start to, experience it. Like your biology, your nervous system has to actually experience that, whether it's eye contact or somebody makes a comment, or even just physically being in a space with other people, is profound. And there's no way you can do that in isolation privately. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. You can't think your way into that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk about good recovery. I'll share a little bit of my experience. You can share some of your experience. I'll share some of my personal experience with this, but I'll start this conversation with, I'll be completely honest with everyone listening. I was not in good recovery despite doing everything. I mean, I'm talking flying to treatment centers, some of the best CSATs, names that everybody knows, because I like the best. So I'm obviously hunting these people out and saying, hey, fix me. What I realized, though, was the programs and therapists and actions don't do the recovery for you. You have to do the recovery. Mm-hmm. And so for everybody listening, again, part of where your wife actually might have some ground to stand on with this is she could be right. She could be watching you go through the motions and not actually be invested into changing the things that need to change. And as somebody who would love to say that I wasn't doing that, in hindsight, I most certainly was doing that. Mm-hmm. I was not in good recovery for the first year. I'm just going to be completely honest with everybody. Despite doing everything, I'm talking every book. I have them all right over here in the corner. Every book, right? Like, what is that? 2.5 feet tall. And again, I'm just being completely honest with everybody. I don't know how much I actually recovered. As you hear that, Geoff, what comes up for you?
It's very normal. I think that, the focus is initially it's on behavior change. It's around stopping the bleeding, not doing the things that brought the crisis on. But this more sort of what's after that. Like, I'm not doing this thing anymore. I'm not going to make things worse. But it can be a very vague sort of what now? And so I think there's a lot of shock. There's a lot of opening yourself up to your own reality. I think that's why a lot of the times in my work with guys, I lead with full accountability, radical honesty, full disclosure. And that's really a chance for you to warm up to your own story. Sure, you're going to be telling the truth to your partner and building foundational trust experiences there by letting them into the reality of what's been happening. But the disclosure, the honesty is really about helping you face and acclimate to your own reality, integrating those two worlds that haven't really wanted to touch each other. And that really starts to get that recovery ball rolling, because you stop the behavior, but then it can almost be compartmentalized. Like, that was then, this is now, let's move forward facing. But going back and spending time in your story, you're going to have to manage emotions. You're going to have to manage shame. You're going to have to model accountability. You're going to learn about yourself and get curious. You're going to be practicing all the empathy and self-compassion and all the things that are actually going to help you become more relational with your partner down the road.
It's a spectrum recovery. And I think that's what I think both the men and the women don't want to hear that. They want it to be a light switch. Addicted, not addicted, okay, this is not going to happen to me. But the truth is, in that first year, again, when I say, I don't know if my recovery moved an inch, there's a lot of me that's not true. I mean, I made a ton of progress with so many things I learned. It laid the foundation for the second year. So in no way am I saying any of that. I'm not saying it was a waste of time. It's not what I'm saying. But if I'm completely honest, and I've said this to my wife as well, even, in year two, I told her, I was like, man, that year one, gosh, I don't even know what really happened there. And it's tough, Geoff, because if you're married, a lot of it's damage control, crisis management.
That's right.
You're getting the crap kicked out of you, which, if you think about it, imagine, right? Somebody's got a heroin addiction. We discover their heroin addiction, imagine throwing them in the container that we throw a lot of the men in, just circumstantially, because of the sexual deception. I mean, it's a really brutal environment. You're being called, if we called those names that your wife's probably calling you, if you called somebody struggling with substance addiction those names, you might even push them into a relapse. I mean, it's brutal, being called a monster, being called a pervert, being called our whole life's a lie, being called a psychopath, being called, I mean, just the name after name after name, you name it. It's a really rough container to be in. When I think the thing for me, Geoff, was the whole time I felt, and again, this was my perception, this is not reality, but my perception at the time was, all these people are teaming up on me for something that I myself don't want to do. And so it felt very unfair. It felt very unjust. Here I am strapped to all sorts of wires and things, and I'm being asked questions at a polygraph. It felt so unjust, because it's like, hey, I'm on your guys' team. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be doing this stuff anymore either. And so it's a rough environment. I think that's what, at least for me, that's what made that first year tough, because there was a lot of shame, a ton of guilt. I felt like I was just getting kicked on the ground while I'm trying, where in a moment where I needed nothing but love, I felt like everybody and anybody was kicking me while I was already on the ground. And it's just a really tough environment in that first year to make the changes that need to be made.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, so true. And that's, to me, that's, I mean, when you talk about, I didn't really move a lot in that first year. I think, right, you staying in place is movement. You not ejecting out of the process is movement, and locking in and being able to start digging some roots. And here you are, you're still working your process, but that's what I see. A lot of guys, it's like, stay in the turbulence, recognize that recovery has started the moment that you're willing to stay put and not escape, because the treatment can't mimic the problem. And a lot of the times that looks like quick fixes. That looks like the very thing that the addiction was, which is easy solutions, quick, get rid of the pain. And so it's a big ask to have somebody basically readapt their nervous system to something they've not been practicing, which is sitting with discomfort, which treatment is that, like you said, the conversations, the lectures, the pain, the crying, the tears, all the stuff is going to pull you into wanting a quick solution, which is really what you've been practicing for years in many cases.
Yeah, especially high achieving men. I mean, it's all about
Totally.
shortcuts. That was my reaction right when I got in. I was like, hey, here's my credit card.
Give me the
Give me the
hacks,
things
right?
I need. Yeah, give me the thing. Give me the best people. Where do I need to go?
That's
And
right.
and I'll be real with you, Geoff. It was quite discouraging because I spent ungodly amounts of money traveling, everything I possibly could. I love my wife so much. I had to fix this.
Totally.
This addiction was in my life for a long time. And so and I had made attempts in the past to get it out of my life. And so this time it was like, all right, bring it on. Let's do this thing. And of course, I'm trying to make a gesture to prove to my wife that I'm serious, right? I'm trying to show her, hey, I'm willing to spend the money, take the time off. Like I'll do whatever I need to do. But again, Geoff, it was quite discouraging when, I think the thing, and again, this was my perception. No one promised this, but this was my little story I told myself. I thought getting out of treatment and doing that I would be cured. And to be honest with you, I was the same freaking dude that went in there. I was smarter, and I knew a lot of tools, but I mean, I'm sorry, 4 weeks. It's just 4 weeks ain't going to undo this whole problem. And so as you and I are talking about like getting into good recovery, I think going to treatment, if that's something you choose to do, that can make you very knowledgeable in a very quick way. But in the end, you go home 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and you're in your house with internet access, and here we are. And so let's kind of wrap this thing up with what is good recovery? How does somebody get in it? And I don't want to talk about the stuff. I think every single guy listening to this already knows the stuff, Geoff. What I'm talking is more about what is a recovery mindset?
I want to go back and maybe answer this with this whole healing versus cure thing. I read this years ago, and it's really had a big impact on the way I think about this. So I'm just going to read it real quick on my computer here, this is actually from the dean of nursing at a major university. She said, on my first day as a nurse, I assumed cure, care, and healing to be synonymous. I have learned that they are not the same. Healing is not cure. Cure is clean, quick, and done, often under anesthesia. Healing, however, is often a lifelong process of recovery and growth in spite of, maybe because of, enduring physical, emotional, or spiritual assault. It requires time. It requires all the energy of your entire being. You have to be there, fully awake, aware, and participating when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of let's cure this versus let's settle into a healing. So to me, recovery and healing are synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
It's about consistency. It's about a willingness to be changed and not just get rid of something that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you increase your container, you increase your capacity to sit with that. So those are going to be, we talk about some of these things, and sometimes it's just kind of like, this is so cliche, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason that these come up a lot, which is dailies and having consistency. You can't shortcut that stuff. Mm-hmm. And your partner isn't going to be fooled by these grand gestures. Ultimately, mm-hmm. they're going to be more moved by a healing mindset, a consistent mindset. And so many partners feel like they have to somehow respond to the grand gesture with a grand gesture of their own, like, oh, thank you so much. Where recovery, when it's happening, you don't really know when to clap. Mm-hmm. You don't know when to cheer, because it just becomes a whole way of seeing and doing life that looks and feels very different than perhaps what was happening before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a to me, I think the thing that shifted for me in the way that you're describing was, I realized how big this thing was. I started realizing, these are not little behaviors. This is a very dynamic thing. Yep. There are issues with my, there are things that I learned really, really young. There are things that I learned in my adolescent years. There are things that I learned as an adult. I mean, there was a time where I was like, I remember looking at these guys at conferences. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're cheating. What's wrong with these guys? Total, I knew a lot of their wives. I'm like, man, these guys are total scumbags. Until fast forward a few years later, now look at me, right? And so when you start to really realize this thing's big. This thing has evolved. Mm-hmm. This thing, there's a lot of different reasons too. I think Geoff, that's the tough part, is everyone looks at it and they're like, oh, the same reason I watch porn's the same reason that I had that affair. That's not necessarily true. And so they could be different. So now you have two issues, or maybe four. And then it's not the same reason that you objectify, right? That could be a different thing. And so the point is, you start to appreciate how big this is. And that's where I started getting into good recovery, is I realized, man, if I really want this out of my life for good, this is going to be a lifestyle change, not an act, not a meeting that I go to, not a therapy appointment. I mean, this is going to have to integrate it in my day-to-day life. And I think the high achiever in me historically saw that as a nuisance and a burden.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to add. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to golf. I wanted to open a new business. I wanted to, hang out with some friends, go on a vacation. I didn't want the thing that I was adding to my day-to-day practices be something having to do with sexual compulsivity, until I realized that the two are actually I shouldn't have separated them.
That's right.
I believe that getting yourself right, ignoring the fact that you did anything sexually compulsive, getting yourself right, I think it's what you should have been doing the whole time. And you should be thankful that, wow, I'm so glad that I saw my distrust of others. I'm so glad
Mm-hmm.
that I saw how two-faced I can be, or three-faced, or four-faced I can be, right?
Yep.
So you start realizing, man, these are personality flaws
Mm-hmm.
that I don't want, regardless of whether they're creating sexual behavior or not. I just don't want them in my life, period, because I don't want that to be a part of my legacy. I want that to stop here. So that was kind of my shift, was I stopped calling it recovery and I started calling it self-mastery.
I love it.
When I go to 12-step, everyone's introducing themselves. They say that whatever. I say, hi, I'm Roland. I'm happy to be here, because I'm not a sex addict. I'm not that. I'm a guy who has learned things that allowed things to happen that I don't want to have happen anymore. And so for me, I'm done calling it recovery. It's a self-mastery journey from here on out, and I don't plan to stop anytime soon.
I love that. And what you're describing, I think, is the real heart and center of this long-term healing, which is curiosity, humility, a willingness to be open to learning, acknowledging mistakes without going into a spiral. I think really successful, smart guys can figure things out quickly. And so this is a very different way of doing life, which is staying on a journey of curiosity and openness, and admitting that you don't have all the answers, and being willing and curious about what those might be, about yourself, about your relationship. And there's just so much material to sort through. And it's like, it's going to take some time, and it's fine. The behaviors, when they stop, create a ton of safety for sure. But what creates a lot of long-term relational safety for couples is his willingness to stay open to himself, to her experience, and continue learning with that curiosity. And that will drive a really genuine recovery. Absolutely.
I love that. So as we wrap up, let's take turns kind of giving these guys with a nugget to improve their recovery, reach out to something, take action, take some initiative, make a change, make this better for themselves. And also kind of speak to that dreaded question of, hey, are you even in good recovery? I'll go first. For me, when that question's asked to you by anybody, I don't care if it's your wife, your friend, your therapist, whatever. I think if your response is reading a list of everything that you are doing and have done, I think you're not in good recovery. I think if somebody asks you, hey, are you in good recovery, or what's your recovery look like? And your answer is, you know what? I've tackled a couple of things, but really right now the big thing is a total distrust of all humans. So that's number one. Number two is my first instinct when I feel something, an unpleasant emotion, is to keep it to myself. And I don't want to tell it to anybody. I internalize, I catastrophize, I disconnect from self when I have that, right? So it's a practice that I want to do. And then third is my view of my wife has changed. She has become one of them. She's no longer my wife. And so, and you read off like, hey, these are the three biggest issues right now that are preventing my healing, but also are a big contributor to allowing me to do a lot of these dehumanization practices in the first place, right? So, I give that little short example because feel the difference in there. One's like, oh, well, every night I'm reading this book and I go to 3 meetings, and you see the difference. One guy's like, well, hey, don't you dare say I'm in bad recovery because look at all the things I'm doing. Whereas the other guy's like, oh, he's still doing all those things, but those don't even come out of his mouth because to him, it's like, oh yeah, those are the things I have to do to create an environment to change. But what he speaks to is, oh yeah, my recovery, it's really these three things that I'm focusing on. I'm using these tools to solve those things. So that's my advice to guys is be proud of your recovery. And I think it's hard to be proud of your recovery when all you're standing on is doing. I think, when you're standing on like, man, I know why this happened. I know what I believed that allowed myself to do these things to myself and do these things to other people, especially my wife. Like I get now what I believed that allowed that to occur. And then here are the things that I'm doing to change those things. It's a small difference, but it makes, in my opinion, when I listen to two guys in recovery describe their recovery, and one guy, it's a laundry list, and the other guy, it's the why. I know what guys in good recovery and what guys going to need some work.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. I would add to that guys that are in good recovery are really wanting to be known. Mm-hmm. There's a difference when you're out acting out or you're just trying to be successful and showing up, performing. There's a lot of, I want to be seen, mm-hmm. but I don't want to be known. Mm-hmm. And being known is about compassion for yourself, staying open to your partner's view of you, which oftentimes will conflict with how you see yourself or want to be seen. So the ability to be known and to allow yourself to be known by your partner is this gentle opening up, the why, the staying put in the uncertainty, and the curiosity. That, to me, that type of a heart shift of I don't know and I'm willing to be known is, it can sound vague in the sense of, well, what does that look like exactly? It's allowing yourself to be asked questions. It's allowing yourself to not know the answer, to go find it, to go spend time thinking about it, journaling, meditating, praying about it, coming back, taking the layers down one at a time, and committing to a long process of exploring how you got here, who you are, what you want, and allowing your partner to provide input to all of that. That's, to me, that's all about being known. And that's rich. There's so much there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love what you said. I call it being proud of your recovery, but I like what you said. I like your delineation between the two. It's the ownership over your recovery, to the point where your wife asks something and you say, that's a great question. Yeah. Are you open to saving that for therapy?
Yeah.
I feel like I don't trust my ability to be able to really get into it in the way that you want, right? It's that ownership of, hey, honey, I get it. This is something you want to know. Are you open to waiting for therapy for that? Because I want to answer it correctly, right? You see what you feel. So I wanted to bring that example up because, again, what we're not saying is, hey, you have to volunteer and try to do all of this. That's not what Geoff is saying. It's this ownership of like, hey, yeah, I want the same thing that you want. And you're welcome to ask anything. And here are our options of how we can go about solving all of these. But it's this pride of, hey, nothing's off the table. Hey, you can bring all of it up. And there's always a way that we can try to solve this together, right? Rather than the panic of, oh God, I have to come up with an answer. Again, that's not being known. Being known and being proud is understanding where you are in your recovery, what you can answer and what you can't answer, and where you guys are as a couple, and just really being proud of the tools that you have available for the current state that you two are in.
Checking the boxes, performing, all of that is about being seen. And you'll be defensive in that position. Being known is what you're describing here, which is, I don't have the answers, and let's see what happens here. And I'm going to stay with you. I won't leave you alone in that. I'll come back. We'll keep trying. There's something about that messiness that is actually very secure for a relationship and for yourself versus something that's clean, tidy, checked off, done, solved, cured.
Seen versus known. I got a feeling that is a future podcast when we have you back on the show. I love that. I'm sad that we're out of time because I feel like we have another hour to discuss something that I think will resonate with a lot of high achievers and entrepreneurs that are listening. Geoff, thanks for coming on. I mean, you're just your approach with this, what you're doing for the field, as active as the two of you are, it's so great. It's so needed. And already know right now you have helped at least, just from people I know, hundreds of couples with your guys' podcast. So I just love this so much.
That means a lot.
Yeah,
thanks
for your time, Geoff. I appreciate this.